We are so pleased to have J. Warner Wallace with us. He is a homicide detective and apologist. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, glad to be here. It's been fun so far.
Thank
what
you.
a great conference.
I really loved your session.
I'm so glad.
I took a lot of notes, actually.
Did you? It's pretty bad. We'll see.
Can you tell us a little more about your background as a detective and how that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I was working in Los Angeles County. I'd worked undercover a number of years. I worked gangs for a couple of years. I worked in our SWAT team, and then I was assigned to robbery homicide, and eventually started working cold cases, which are just unsolved murders. And a bunch of these got the attention of NBC, so we ended up doing a bunch of Dateline episodes. And that just opened an opportunity for me to talk about the gospel publicly. But I wasn't a Christian when I started. When I started, I was a pretty skeptic. You see a lot of, you certainly are aware of the presence of evil if you're working in law enforcement. So, and also I just wasn't raised around any Christians. So I didn't know really anybody who ever, we talked about it afterwards, no one ever invited us to church as a kid or as an adult. No, that's not true. Toward the very end, people were inviting me, but I thought they were so silly that I wasn't interested in the invitation.
Yeah.
So it just took, for us, it was when we finally did go to church, I was intrigued by a pastor who knew how to get my attention. He said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And if you're a prideful human who thinks that you're the smartest man who ever lived, then you might be interested in somebody else making that claim.
That's good.
And so that's what got me buying a Bible to see if that was true.
Well, I really appreciated, so I'm 35, you mentioned when you were 35, you were very critical of Christianity.
Right.
How would you encourage someone being able to relate to that who is critical of Christianity?
Well, it's okay to be critical. But just remember that there's a level of proof that you would accept for almost any claim, and it's not necessarily the level of proof you're accepting here. So what I mean is, I've never worked a criminal trial where I tried to prove something beyond a possible doubt. That's not the standard of evidence. The standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if critical doubt, beyond a possible doubt is here, beyond a reasonable doubt is lower. There's a gap between those two. And I tell jurors all the time that I'm not going to be able to answer every question for you, because I can't even answer every question on the case I've been working for 20 years because he hasn't confessed to me yet. So I don't know a lot of the little details, the why and hows. I may not know. That he did it, I can demonstrate. But why and how he did it, what motivated, those are things that he'd have to confess to us. And so I cannot talk about those things to you. I can give you everything you need to know to make a decision, but not everything that could be known. And there's a difference between everything that you need to know and everything that could be known. And it lies in that gap between reasonable doubt and possible doubt. And by the way, you don't know anything beyond a possible doubt. Everything you know is only beyond a reasonable doubt. Are you willing to embrace that same standard of proof for the things that come about Christianity? And I think you'd have to be, because there's nothing you know beyond a possible doubt. You could even argue, and we used to think, well, I at least know my own existence, but there are people who think all of this is just a computer simulation, and that we have been programmed that we think we exist when we don't. It's just part of the program. And so you really can't be that sure if you stop and think about your level of proof. Are you making the same kind of grand assumptions about Christianity? Are you fair? Are you being fair? One thing I learned early on, the first rule of investigations is you can't be a know-it-all. You can't think you know. As soon as you walk in the room, oh, she's divorced and she's dead here? Oh, her husband's a killer. It may be that her husband's a killer. There's probably a good chance her husband's a killer, but you can't assume that her husband's a killer until you've done the investigation. Don't assume that there is no God until you've done the investigation.
That's great insight, thank you. In your book, Person of Interest, you talk about making a case without evidence, and you use the illustration of a bomb going off, and how you can study the fuse and the fallout.
That's right.
So how does that come to play in finding evidence for Jesus?
So look, first of all, as far as evidence goes, everything is evidence. Everything is evidence. What's in the room at the time of the murder? That's evidential. What's missing from the room? That's evidential. What did he say? That's evidential. What did he fail to say? That's evidential. It turns out everything can be used as evidence. And so when you're looking at like bomb explosions, the bomb is no longer there. Maybe it's been absolutely obliterated by the explosion. But the residue, its impact on the environment, you can determine certain truths about the explosion just from the crime scene, just from the blast radius. And that's what we're doing with Jesus. If you were unwilling to even entertain opening a Bible, it turns out that the fuse of history leading up to the appearance of Jesus and the fallout of history after Jesus will actually tell you everything you need to know about Jesus, even if you didn't have a Bible. And that to me is remarkable because it cannot be said of any other historical figure. You might think, oh yes it can. Oh no, it can't. No one has had the impact on literature, art, music, education, science, and world religions that Jesus of Nazareth is. And if you think about it as an atheist, the things that mattered most to me was literature, art, music, education, and science. The 5 things that Jesus has impacted more than any other historical figure. So if you care about those things, you can thank you some Jesus, because it turns out he's the reason why we have the world we are in to be thankful for.
That's very good. I loved how you talked about the significance of the time in history when Jesus came. You talked about things that predated and also followed. Right. So why was that time specifically significant?
Well, a lot of kind of red zone opportunities occur. That, for me, I call it a red zone when the window opens just perfectly for that particular suspect to do that crime to that particular victim. And that red zone will be different for every suspect you investigate and every victim you investigate. When those things line up, you see, oh wow, this is the time when probably he would have his best opportunity to kill her. And sure enough, she's killed in that opportunity, that period of time. You're probably looking at the right guy. So the same thing is true of Jesus. It turns out there's a spiritual fuse, and we talked about that a little bit today, a kind of a cultural fuse of the Roman Empire. It turns out that and even prophecy from the Old Testament, that these things open up a very short window in which all of these worshiping ancients who have created these mythologies in their heads that have similarities, well, there's going to come somebody who's going to best personify everything you've ever imagined about God. But you'd have to all be worshiping those deities in order for this to have that kind of impact. So that gives you one window of opportunity. The culture of the Roman Empire narrows that window because you have to have the roads in place and the Etruscan alphabet and all the postal services, global peace. There's a window that's opened up by culture that allows for the transmission of the information about Jesus. And there's also a prophecy from Daniel that tells you about when Jesus is going to show, when the Messiah is going to show up. If you overlap all of these windows of opportunity, you get a very small window in the first century, and Jesus happens to arrive in it. So he's either incredibly lucky, or there's something about that red zone that says that of all the candidates that could change history and cause us to call the first century, Jesus is the one who takes advantage of all these red zone opportunities. Nobody else does them.
Thank you. So I have 2 more questions for our audience. Why should someone listening consider Jesus a person of interest in their life?
Right, because it turns out of all the other historical figures that have impacted the things that you care about, I guarantee you if you're watching this, you're going to care about something in that combination. You're going to care about either literature, art, music, education, world religions, or science. Those 6 things are the fundamental attributes of humanity that most of us lean toward, that most of us have interest in, that most of us think are either life-fulfilling or life-giving. Well, if you're looking for the one figure in history who most foundationally poured in and created the world you're living in now in those areas, that's Jesus of Nazareth. If you're interested in any of those things, you might want to be interested in the man who made those things, the God-man who made those things possible. So that's why I think, look, I'm not saying anything about the fact he's God yet. I think you should be interested even if you're suspicious about him being God.
That's good.
Now, I've written other books. This is from Person of Interest. I wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, in which we talked about whether or not the scriptures are reporting the truth about Jesus. But even if you didn't open a Bible, you should still be interested in Jesus, because the stuff that you're interested in ends up being based on Jesus. It stands on his shoulders.
Yeah. That's great. So where would you direct someone if they were watching and they were spiritually curious? Where would you direct them in their interest of learning about Jesus?
The Gospels. I mean, first you start with the Gospels. Everything starts with God's Word. Now, I don't say that just because I'm a Christian, and so I'm reluctant to say it to you, because you may not be a Christian who's watching this. But let's face it, you're looking for data about Jesus. The most ancient data we have about Jesus, even if you're a skeptic of the Scriptures, you'll probably agree that of all the manuscript evidence we have about Jesus, the most ancient is going to be in the Gospels. So I started there. But then I wouldn't leave it there. I mean, for me, I needed to know, okay, great, this is what it says. This is the A to Z of what the Gospels claim about Jesus, but I needed to know, is there a way for me to test that to see if any of that is true? And that's when you begin that process of learning how to test historical events, learning how to decide if something is actually true. But the information I started with was in the ancient documents. It wasn't just in the scriptures. I went from there to all the writings of the most ancient students of the disciples. I wanted to see what they said, those disciples said. You can look at a lot of antiquity to see what did non-Christians say about Jesus in the first 3 centuries. All the stuff I looked at was before the Council of Nicaea. Because the claim I had in my head was, oh yeah, by the time it gets to that, it's the Roman Empire that's crafting this thing. So I wanted to know, what was Christianity all about before the Roman Empire grabbed hold of it and leveraged it? So I just was suspicious of anything post the Council of Nicaea, post Constantine. So if all you do is focus on the stuff that's pre-Constantine, oh, trust me, you'll have enough information.
Well, you have given us such valuable insight. Thank you so much.
Oh, glad to do it.
How can we connect with you in your ministry?
Yeah, you can find me at coldcasechristianity.com, and that's a place where I post 3 times a week. We've got podcast videos and articles there every week.
Awesome. Well, this has been so meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.